Okay, so this is a talk I'm calling The Context of Glitching. I'm going to talk about a bunch of ideas. Some of them are very abstract. I've tried to find things to illustrate them. I've also included some of my own work. And the reason I did that is, as I said earlier, I'm also a studio artist. I work on things, but my studio art and my theoretical work are all tied up together. So some of these ideas are actually illustrated as much as is possible to illustrate an abstract idea by some of the things that I do in the studio. So I included those things in here. They're generally short, so I hope everybody will just kind of bear with me. Hopefully they're not horrible. Now, one of the things that's really central to my work, and whether this is as a theorist or as an artist, is breaking stuff. I like to break stuff. Not because it's nihilistic, not because it's destructive, not because breaking things is fun. It is. But because when things break down, it lets you know where their edges are. It lets you see the limina, the marginal spaces around them. And it's in those marginal spaces that I find the things that I'm really interested in, which is how we recognize things, how we engage with the world, this kind of immediacy that becomes possible by addressing that sort of engagement. This is an idea that literally runs through almost everything that I've done. It has some role in pretty much every project I've ever had. When I write about somebody, it's because there's something in their work that interests me in relation to that I see them doing that's just fascinating. And it really informs all of the work that I myself do as an artist as well as a theorist. Now, today, as I said when I was talking about the book itself, we're going to be doing things in this talk related to my new book. And the ideas contained in that book get pulled out, and we're going to look at a small collection of them, the ones that I think are kind of important, at least in a general sense. Now, this is a book about glitch art and about glitches and about the problematics that we have when we start to encounter these as art, when they start using the breakdown as an expressive gesture. And the key in this, for me at least, is that anything that we identify as broken is broken. Doesn't matter whether it's actually a breakdown, or it's someone imitating a breakdown, or it's just a bunch of things that the audience says, oh, that's a breakdown, even though it has nothing to do with breakdown. If the audience looks at it and says it's broken, then for my purposes, at least theoretically, it's broken. It makes it a glitch. Now, part of this critique, and glitch theory is a critique, begins in my earlier work critiquing digital technology and what I call digital capitalism. My idea of digital capitalism is convergent but distinct from what Dan Schiller was talking about when he described digital capitalism back in the 1990s. This is a book that has been translated either in whole or in part into, I think, 9 languages now. I know there is a German version. You saw it earlier. There is a Chinese version, which I have never actually seen, but they paid me to do it, so I'm assuming they did it. Someday I'll have somebody in China find me a copy because I would actually like to see it. The big idea in that book, and while the cat organ is exciting, the big idea from my perspective is something that I call the aura of the digital. Now, this idea is about a fantasy, and it's a very specific kind of fantasy. It creates all sorts of pathological fallacies about digital technology, about the world around it, about our relationship to the digital, because this is a fallacy where when we encounter something digital, we have this fantasy that it's some other realm that is not connected to the physical world in any way. So we don't think about the realities that constrain digital things. We don't think about limited resources or time or expenses or labor or even the decay that can happen. Instead, we simply focus on the idealization of the digital. And that idealization takes a variety of forms. The first of which begins with a simple observation about the digital. And while it is possible for digital things to decay over time, and bit rot does destroy files, the digital as a technology is about creating things that are immortal. that escape from all of the constraints of physicality. Because when we talk about bit rot, what's decaying is not the digital file, but the container that holds it. And the disruption of the digital container then damages the file that it holds. It's kind of like the punch card we're looking at right here. The digital information in this card is not the card, it's the collection of holes in their relationships to each other within that card. What that means is the card is not actually the digital. The digital is all of these empty spaces, these absences that the card allows us to contain and control and use. So when the card decays, in a sense, we lose its contents, but the contents are entirely separate from the card. Those contents are the digital. The card is simply the vehicle that's holding it. And the reason that this happens is that the digital is not an analog technology. It's not a technology based in a translation of one thing into another, but a semiotic identification of something, its translation into a linguistic construct, in this case, computer code, the data that the computer contains, which we can then compress, we can expand, provided we have the appropriate codecs, the appropriate sets of rules to decode it. We can even recreate information when we've lost it, just like with language. That's what's happening right here with this fresco. Everything in the fresco is missing. All the red, that's gone. But we know what it says and what it should contain for the most part. There are some gaps. Because this is language, and language follows specific rules. It makes particular demands, and if we identify the language and we identify the rules, then we can fill in the parts that are missing. This is what the video codec does, or the compression codec does. This is what happens with digital data when we decompress it, is we, in a sense, invent all of this red material. But this immortality that the digital has creates something else, and I call that the aura of information. This is an aspiration that we can take an abstract state, an abstract realm, the state of information, a completely hypothetical, imaginary construct that contains all of this data, and make it into something that is physical, that is immanent, that we can then manipulate. We can turn it into an instrumentality. We can use it as a tool. It can become a source of value. And more than that, it can also become a mechanism of value generation. The aura of information claims that all of the physical constructions of this are equivalent to each other. So that when you have a file, for example, this graphic, this is not the graphic Warhol created. This is a transcode of Warhol's graphic. Warhol's original graphic is in a deceased file format on floppy drives for a kind of computer that nobody's made in 30 years. They are held at the Warhol Foundation. If you want to see it, they don't show you the actual file. They show you a digital facsimile of it that the aura of information leads us to say is the same, because it renders something for us that looks more or less like what the original looked like. But this is actually a completely different file. The data is encoded differently. The information it contains is not equivalent to the information contained in the original, even if they render equivalent outputs for us. That's the aura of information, that we think that this is equivalent to its original. Now, the aura of the digital takes this output that we see, and where the aura of the information says that it's equivalent to any other version of the file, the aura of the digital says that all of those versions that we're seeing are imperfect copies of the real ideal file, the data file. And so anything that's wrong with those imminent copies, we should simply ignore. And this is especially true for glitched files. So when we look at something like, for example, this, it's short, massively glitched. The aura of information makes us want to ignore the glitches, makes us want to think of them as just transient. The aura of the digital tells us that the real file is the original digital file that doesn't have anything wrong with it, so that when we encounter something like this, all of that conspires to make us aware of these two factors, aura of the information, aura of the digital. But both of those things are products of our own interpretive expertise. And it's that expertise that I'm really interested in. No, it's playing it again. Glitch there. There we go. Because you can make changes to that file after it's been glitched, and it will generate other glitches, like, for example, right here. But what these glitches are revealing to us is not the operations of the machine, not anything dialectical, not anything innate to the technology. What they're showing us is the contingency of all of those meanings. Because when we say something is glitched, what we're really talking about is our expectations, is our anticipations, what we think it's supposed to be like. So that when we encounter the glitch in itself, we're not actually capturing anything. We're not actually encountering anything. We're encountering our own expectations, which are dictating how and what we think we're seeing, and they are shaping the entire. It's transformative. So our identification depends on something that I call diagnostic recognition. We look at the thing that we are seeing. It is not what we expect. So we have to decide, is this noise that we should ignore? Is it something that requires a response from us? In other words, is it a kind of a breakdown? All of these are preliminary decisions that come in advance of any kind of signification. We have not yet decided it's meaningful. We are instead evaluating our perceptions, looking at the cues in our perceptions, and saying, okay, out of all of these cues, some of them are what we expect, some of them are not what we expect. How do we regard the ones that we don't expect? Should we just simply ignore them and discard them from our attention? Do they require us to take some kind of action? In other words, are we looking at something that's broken down, and theoretically we should get up, walk up to the screen, and fiddle a knob or bang it or do something to make it work properly? The kinds of iconography that this produces, and as a kind of media historian, this is one of the things that I find very interesting about glitch. I think that the glitches that are being selected for, that we are embracing, are ones that already have things in common with forms that we're familiar with aesthetic forms that we're familiar with. For example, we have here a piece of a frame from Bob Weiss's video for Evident Utensil that data moshes, that creates these very characteristic smears. And then on the right, we have a piece of a futurist painting by Bala, which produces the same kinds of iconography, the same kinds of image repetitions, so that when we look at the data moshed videos, we tend to say, oh, we sort of know what this is. This is a familiar aesthetic. We don't have to say that it's necessarily broken. And that leads us to accept it as not just a semantic function, that what we are looking at is what it is, that, oh, it's a glitch, it's broken, but it is also potentially meaningful, expressive. In other words, it serves as a semantic vehicle that allows us to recognize it as part of a larger index of meanings and recognized forms. This duplicity is what gives glitches their capacity to make us aware of our technology, to make those things that are naturalized and invisible or even vital suddenly become, oh, this is a machine that I'm looking at. This is a technology I'm engaging. This is something that isn't really invisible, that isn't really naturalized. And the notion that glitch has a critical meaning really depends upon that recognition. But that recognition is a semantic function. It relies upon and requires our technical fluency, our aesthetic expertise, our knowledge, cultural knowledge of which glitches resemble aesthetic forms, which glitches don't. So it's not about whether it's breaking down or how it's breaking down, but whether we understand it as breaking down and at the same time as being something more than that. And when it becomes more than that, we're not just looking at a technical issue. We are now looking at something that is expressive. But the same duplicity that makes that expressiveness possible is also destabilizing. It destabilizes the expressiveness just as much as it destabilizes the diagnostic recognition. It's not just about a symbolic, oh, look, there's something missing here, or a diagnostic, okay, your video is not linked properly, you need to go and fix that. It instead becomes something that really reveals to us our fluency and knowledge. And so as a theorist, taking that as a starting point gives us a whole series of very interesting ramifications. The first of which is the idea of glitch is both eternal and very much contingent. It's very central to how we do all of our interpretations. And glitch art is simply a special case that has a lot of very interesting theoretical ramifications for us. So let me give you another example.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture.
This is from 1961. It's the opening to a television show, a program called The Outer Limits. Those are the credits. What happens there is a fairly common broadcast error, one that would often lead people to get up and try to adjust their television sets to fix the signal, which is why we have the voiceover instructing us not to, telling us that this is intentional, because it's not something that the audience can be expected to or relied upon assuming is expressive. Now, 60 years later, we have the advantage of knowing all of the things that we know that happened since then. But in 1961, that knowledge is still in the future. And it's that knowledge that guides us from the semantic cue, okay, there's this pattern on screen, to a diagnostic recognition that, okay, this is an error. But instead of advancing into a symptomatic analysis to say, okay, this is what's wrong, this is how we fix it, we instead step into the symbolic realm and think about it as an expressive action. That expressive action is the first step in this spiral of signification that I call mobile articulation. Because at higher levels of articulation, these signs and signifiers become the signifiers, the cues, the elements for higher level, more complex, more dynamic sorts of interpretation. Now, when we talk about meaning, this is the stuff we're usually talking about. But glitch art forces us back down that chain so that we have to continually return to this foundational moment where we're differentiating between a semantic cue that is signifying and a semantic cue that is not. A semantic cue that we need to pay attention to, and all of those other things that are not semantic cues, but we'd simply call noise, non-signifying. But what glitches do to us is kind of like this figure. You're looking at an ambivalent figure. I know it looks like typography. It's not. You're looking at a face. We have a nose and profile. We have a curve above one eye socket. Then we have a circle for the eye and a line for the mouth. It's not the text that reads 2 degrees with an underline. It's actually a profile with a mouth. That instability requires us to reevaluate our typography, to say, okay, this isn't typography, this is a picture. We reassign all of our semantic cues, and in doing so, we enter into a more complex and dynamic kind of signification where we're looking at the cues, we're engaging with how they play, we're considering all of the ways in which they shift and slide and move and contort, if you will, forcing us to rethink all of our interpretations about what they are before we can build any other kind of signifying system above that. Now, these kinds of interpretations, these kinds of exploits, are not unique or specific just to glitch art. They're fairly common, actually. What we're looking at right now is an example of what's called a semic poetry, poetry that does the same thing that glitch does, but does it to language, and the difference between graphic figures and linguistic figures, and in a sense, glitches them to force us to constantly shift. We think we see a letter, but then we don't. We think we read something, but then it doesn't actually read that. The letters disappear as you look at them, and when you move your eye somewhere else, they reappear. All of those weird shiftings around are what make us think about glitches in terms of materiality. Because on the one hand, they do draw our attention to this set of cues that we're trying to resolve into something. But the kind of materiality that the glitch gives us is very different depending upon the kind of medium that we're looking at. Looking at language, it looks one way. Looking at analog technology, where the signal has an indexical link to its source, the voltage that produces the pixel in the analog image is directly connected to the strength of the photon encountering the detector, and so they are in a sense linked. This is why analog images decay the way they do. This is what makes analog images, well, analog. And then we have the digital, which, as I said, is purely semiotic. It's not about the voltage, but about the translation of the voltage into a linguistic representation, the data that constructs the image. And so the kinds of glitches that the digital is capable of and is prone to are qualitatively different, if not technologically distinct, from those of analog media. That doesn't mean that we can't put them in the same spectrum, as I have done right here. We have the glitches that affect our hardware. This tends to be the display system, whether it's the screen or the camera if you're talking about images. But when it comes to the software, that is to say your data files, all of the information that you're manipulating, this is where things really deviate more dramatically from the analog, because you start to get things that you can do that are very specific to data, that are very specific to the machine, and which are not otherwise connectable to their source. All of this stuff about materiality, however, just like everything else with the glitch, depends upon how we choose to address it. If we talk about materiality as a question of the container, then we're talking about things about bit rot and file storage and longevity of the file and the durability of the medium that's been stored in. If we talk about the data itself, then we're talking about issues of transcoding and recording the file and how it is compressed and how it is decompressed in the codecs that we use. And yes, I picked images that look awful for exactly that reason. And then we have the things that affect our ability to read the file, the viewing problem, as it were, the access. Because we can have the file, we can copy it, we can keep it going, we can keep it moving exactly the same, keep the bytes exactly the same, avoid the bit rot that can otherwise destroy the container, and we can still lose our access to the file because we can no longer open it, which is what happens to a lot of this older digital information. But none of these are actually materiality. All of these are stand-ins for it. So I'll get back to that. I'm going to talk about something else first, then I will come back. I'll circle back to this question. I'm going to talk about intention. Because when we talk about these things that are signifying, when we say something is signifying, we are saying it's intentional. Somebody did it, they placed it, they planned on it, it's supposed to be there, this is what it is. it's expressive. Because if it doesn't have an intention, then it can't express anything because there's nothing to express. There's been nothing encoded. Which gives us this wonderful picture, which is not a selfie. This is Naruto. Naruto is a crested macaque monkey in Indonesia. This is a photograph shot by a nature photographer about a decade ago. It made a whole lot of rounds on the internet. It was very, very popular because everybody who sees this photo says, oh, it's a monkey selfie. But that's impossible. It's a monkey. Monkeys don't know what selfies are. Monkeys don't know what cameras are. Monkeys don't know about the whole cultural apparatus built up around the selfie on the internet. So for a monkey to take a selfie is quite literally impossible, and yet here we have a monkey selfie. But we don't. This is more, and really quite literally, like the monkeys pounding on typewriters, eventually typing out everything that's ever been written by William Shakespeare. It's just a random outcome. And in fact, the photographer who shot this selected this picture from a much larger quantity of images because this is the one that has the right cues for the audience to look at it and say, aha, that's a monkey selfie. And then apply all of the things that we expect monkey selfies to entail to the image. But all of that imposition is just that. It's an imposition. It's a construct. There is no monkey selfie here. If anything, the monkey may be responding to its reflection in the lens of the camera, but that doesn't make this a selfie. That doesn't even make this the kind of recognition a child has looking into a mirror and recognizing itself. This is something else. But to us, the human audience, because of the framing, the focus, the shape, the entire composition, we look at this and say, selfie, immediately without thinking about it. Just as we look at this and say glitch immediately without thinking about it. Where we give meaning and expression to the selfie, we give no meaning and no expression to the glitch because, well, glitches are broken. What we're doing is we're applying something that I call the intentional function. This is not conscious. It's not intended. It's actually a purely autonomous choice, and the term intentional function is simply a way of describing it, because what we are doing is we are impugning intent to something. And what we are doing it is we look and say, I recognize these cues. In the past, these cues have meant intention, so I'm going to say these cues are intended, so I'm going to treat it as if it's intentional. That's the intentional function. It allows us to look at things and say, okay, this is a face. There's no face here. There's no face here either, but you probably see one right here in the middle. What you're looking at are entirely artifacts of your own perceptions. There are just enough cues here in just enough the right way, just properly placed and organized so that when you look at it, you say face, just like when you look at the monkey selfie, you say selfie. The reason that we're willing to accept the products of generative AI systems as a whole is because the databases they have and the structure of the apparatus are such that we get these cues in the work. So when we look at a work, we say, oh, look, it's another selfie. Oh, look, it's a landscape. It's the Mona Lisa. But in both cases, it's our past experience and our prior knowledge shaping our interpretation, allowing us to see things the way that we see them, allowing us to say those things. But the intentional function is actually an argument against intentionality as a whole. Because what we're calling intentional and what the computer is exploiting is the capacity to identify these features without there actually having to be any intention present, without there being any meaning present. All of these things are, in a sense, hallucinated by the audience based upon all of their past experiences and expertise. And so what happens is we kind of disappear into the machine, only to then reappear as we impose ourselves on it in order to make it become coherent. There are some things that constrain this, and glitch art is one of those peculiar uses of this kind of stuff that really exploits it so that we become aware. Because it's not a matter of whether the glitches are there, it's not a matter of their ontology, it's a matter of our identification of them. and how we understand that identification. And that identification is shaped not just by our past experience of glitches, but by our past experience of a whole series of other semantic cues that surround the glitch, that give it context, that let us say, okay, this is a glitch inside of a particular space. If it's inside of a gallery, then we're automatically going to say, this is potentially art. Even if the monitor is breaking down, we may very well look at it and say, okay, this could very well be an art object, and then proceed to consider it as if it is. This is why the gallery context is such a powerful cue. You put anything into a gallery context, and writers have been noting this for decades now. The context itself nominates what's been presented there for expressive uses. In other words, it declares it to be an aesthetic object and invites us to consider it as an object that could be art, to, in a sense, nominate it as an aesthetic vehicle. Online, we have the same kinds of contextual things happening. This is the act of presentation. If you run, say, the hashtag glitchart through any of these image sharing things, I have here a screenshot from Instagram, you get a whole variety of things that the people who've made them have nominated as potentially expressive artistic objects, potentially glitch art. After all, they've used the hashtag. But what we're seeing in that nomination is what I'm calling a discursive aesthetic. This discursive aesthetic is implicit in any kind of digital work. It's there as a byproduct of how the aura of the digital and the state of information and the aura of information all come together in the rejection of our empirical encounter, the material encounter that we're seeing, and instead direct our attention to something else that is missing. And with glitch, this becomes very obvious. With glitch art, the whole aesthetic experience of glitch aesthetics is really about this discursive aesthetic, where our attention is redirected away from the object we're looking at to some other absent, idealized original. In this case, with glitch, this would be the digital source file. But that digital source file is not just for glitch. It's for all of the digital files that we encounter. When we engage them and we think about them through the aura of the digital, when we forget about what we're looking at, when we ignore the physicality, we are, in a sense, pursuing transcendence. We are trying to transcend the immanent experience that we have. And when it becomes an aesthetic quality, this is the intent to express. This is the aesthetic it produces. In a way, it's implicit in all of the glitches that we might make, in all of the glitches that we might see. And when they are being nominated as aesthetic objects, as this collection of Instagram glitches are, then the glitch art that we're seeing is an exploit of this aura of the digital. Now, all of these things are implicit. These things are happening. What I'm trying to do here is trying to describe what is going on, rather than saying that this is a conscious choice. These things are more like autonomous processes, structural effects of how our aesthetics and our technical expertise and our various ideologies about digital technology all converge and then get exploited by glitch art to produce this immanence for transcendent experience, this ability to step beyond, ironically enough, the broken files that we are admiring, to consider them as aesthetic objects, which forces us to transcend their brokenness. And that is very exciting. We do not need to watch it again. Talk about control and loss of control right there. So when we talk about control, specifically about control over glitches, what we are talking about is our own desires to organize, to project order, to contain the ambivalence that is there in the world around us. Most of the time, our everyday experiences mask this. And it's specifically liminal experiences. Glitch art is a great example of this, that bring this marginal status, this ambivalence, this uncertainty into the foreground and force us to confront it. And in forcing us to confront it, we are then, at the same time, imposing our control over it so that that confrontation doesn't necessarily happen. It doesn't necessarily become critical. To talk about something as a critical confrontation requires us to make a critical engagement, but there's no way to guarantee that critical engagement because that's a choice of the audience. So what we are left with instead is something deeply ambivalent that is always shifting on us, that is uncertain, that is transient, that draws attention to our desires for a transcendent technology, even if we don't actually ever achieve it. And this is something that always ultimately resides in the immediacy, the imminence of our encounter and the process of that encountering. Okay, so thank you. That's all I have for my talk. Hope it wasn't too tedious. Now you're muted, Prana.
Sorry. Wow, thank you, Michael. It was amazing, amazing what you did. And here on my paper, there are a few notes. First of all, this is a very important book, and these are very important thoughts which you made there. And it's amazing. It's everything. It's in this crazy year 2023. Yeah. So we make big steps forward, big steps, and your book is super important for that, for everything, for the development of that. If there is no urgent question, I would like to look on my papers here and to show you a little bit, or to tell you what I'm thinking or what I thought when you were telling us all these amazing details. So when it came to the semantic vehicle, then I was thinking probably Michael could help to define the glitch as a sort of metaphor machine. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I had the opportunity when I was a student to follow the lectures of Hans Blumenberg. Arbeit am Mythos, do you know him? Or oh, that's good. That's very good. I would very, very excited to hear what you think of him. And it's why I can't write something because I'm so stupid. Okay, I continue. This Arbeit am Mythos, the work on mythos. Mythos is Greek, so I don't have to translate it. Or this book, Metaphorology, is like, yeah. So it's a book about all these complex, this complex semantics, which could describe something like emotions, but also something like the complex political situation or the reality as we have to face it, which is always complex when you start to think about it in a serious way. And even when you showed us these films, then I was thinking it's absolutely true that we are not talking about a transformation or a translation or something. We are thinking about big installations, big emotions, be in the glitch. All these videos you showed us, these are great introspections of something, when as an art historian, when I try to find words for Mark Roscoe, there was Max Imdahl. He's not very well known. I don't know if his books were translated into English, but it's like looking in the inside of your body. Yeah, it's looking at your heart, how it beats, or like your organs, how they work. And these glitches, these videos which you showed, these are really be inside of something, like I don't know, like a film where it's not only one display, you know, and it's not so. You know that I confessed you that I had some deep dives into synesthesia, but you have this technesthesia, you know. This is really a new quality of metaphor as a Lebensphilosophy, you know. It's you give us the opportunities to use all these big words, you know, these transcendent monsters. Yeah. So but then when I was thinking about the glitch as a metaphor machine, I was thinking of Rosa's DCT station. You know, she showed this on this meeting in Chicago in this gallery, and that's also which when we will go to Rosa's picture, and then she will explain this coding ideas. So this is also not to translate one word into another. It's more, you have to understand, or everybody will see that you don't understand what you're talking about here. And that's the reason why this book is so important. You know, or you asked me to read it, and I was thinking I need a colloquium with a few students. Yeah, that we have to read it very carefully, very, very slowly. And
find all the mistakes then. You'll find all the
no, it's I mean, congratulations to this book, and I mean it's co-genial to Adorno and to Bloomberg, full stop.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so proud that you are here. So this is a big thank you. But I see that we have a nice audience here. That's very, very nice. That also Jan Distelmeier was here, and oh yeah, some people were just having a tea break, I think. But there were only nice, very nice comments here. So who wants to have the first question to the audience? Who make the first questions? There are two new news. I'm still present. Yeah, hi. Yeah, I see this. Rosa, you have the first question. We are still here.
But I was interested. Can you hear me, Michael?
Probably I switch my sync out, and then.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Woo! Feedback. I don't know why, but
you come to my head.
no, I'm refusing. I will write it down. I'm just curious about that first part that you were talking about, which is about immortal digitality. I could not follow that part.
Okay. The digital is a language construct. And like all language constructs, it is immortal. It transcends whatever container you put it in. Let's say you have a book. So, here, we need a book. Visually. Here, we have a book. Okay. Contents of the book, right? The book gets burned, we bury it in the yard, use it as a fire lighter, feed it to the dog, slice it up into little tiny slips and make, paper mache out of it. The content of the book isn't the book. The content of the book is the information that the book contains that happens to be held in this particular form. So in a sense, the content of the book is immortal because we can separate it from the container that's holding it. We can make more of them. We can make as many copies as we want. We can reformat them. We can make them large type. We can make them small type. It's still the same information. As long as the words remain constant, the information remains constant. Whether we can read it or not, that's a different story. Whether the book holds up or not, that's a different story. Whether the book is good or not, that's a different story. But the information itself is immortal. You can't kill the information. You can only destroy the containers that are holding it until we no longer have it. That's what I'm talking about when I say the digital is immortal. Because it's like the Warhol file. You can retrieve the Warhol file from the floppy disk from 1987. Well, 1985 when he made the file. You can't read it. You can make 1 billion copies of it. They will all be the same. You can't read them either, unless you have the right software to read it. But the information that that file contains remains constant. And it's because it's constant, we have the fantasy that we can then transcode it into some other format, and it's the same. It's like taking something and translating it into a different language. You take Homer's Iliad and translate it into Esperanto, which no one reads either. Is it the same book? Of course not. Homer's Iliad is written in Greek. But the idea that it's the same book, that's the awe of information. That we still have Homer's Iliad, originally written on any variety of other media than we have now. And that the versions of it that we have today, even the ones in Greek, are radically different than the one that Homer wrote, or at least set down. It's questionable whether he actually wrote it. But the information has escaped from all of the containers that ever held it. That's pretty close to immortality. You can kill the box, but the stuff that's in it keeps going. That's what I mean when I say immortality. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, you know, I can follow what you're saying. I will reflect on it.
More questions?
Please. Here's a good question. How does that clash with embodiment? You mean the immortality? I'm guessing you mean immortality. Well, the embodiment is the particular encounter that we're having with it. And in a sense, it doesn't, because these are two completely different categories of thing. One of them is, in a sense, an ontological observation about the nature of information, that information is immortal. The other is a very specific empirical observation about how we encounter the information. So there isn't so much a clash here as we're looking at two different categories. The immortality is in one category, the embodiment is in a separate category. And so when we talk about these, we're actually talking about different things. Like, we're talking about cats versus cat pianos.
More questions?
Okay, I do this to people all the time when I talk about stuff.
So can we make a German translation, Michael?
Of course. I think that would be great.
Yeah, it's a good way to read it very, very slowly, and that's really important. I think I don't know how I can, if there are no questions, how I can say thank you. And
thank you. I had a great time doing this. It was an honor to come and talk to everyone.
And it's so good to listen to you and to see how yeah, the glitch is getting something very noble, you know. It's you did amazing things to the glitch and to the glitch community also. And I mean, just try to find final last words, because the next section, the next lecture won't be moderated by me. I give the moderation to Till. So probably it's the time again to remind that this year 2023 was very important for the glitch, and your book is a big part of this. It started with the meeting in Chicago. I think this was also a very important step. Then the auction in New York and at Sotheby's, and now in Munich. And I'm very grateful that this was my first glitch year, and I'm very grateful that so much interesting things were happened, and that we sit together now in a so international, nice, worldwide colloquium and listen to your great lecture, and to see that not the last words were said about the glitch. So it's just starting.